This week, we'll be discussing contracting and goal setting. As a reminder, the planned change process has 5 steps: assess, plan, implement, monitor, and terminate. You will be working with your partner throughout these 5 steps. In meeting number 1, you completed an assessment. In this meeting, you got to know your client. You had them complete a biopsychosocial assessment similar to a social history in which you identified their general problem symptoms. We also completed a supplemental assessment to understand the scope of their symptoms. In meeting number 2, you will be planning the intervention with your client. Planning will include identifying their target concern. This will be determined based on the assessment information that you gathered based on the biopsychosocial assessment intake form and in talking with your client. Based on their target concern, you will develop a goal with the client, which will pinpoint their desired outcome to address the target concern, along with tasks or action steps to achieve that desired goal. So a contract states in clear terms the client goals and responsibilities. It lays out everything that you and your client are in agreement to. It will contain the goals that the client is to accomplish, the tasks for both the client and you as the social worker, how you're going to evaluate whether the client has made progress towards their goal, strengths and resources of the client that are related to the goal and will help them carry out that goal. And finally, any potential barriers that the client might encounter that might prevent them from being successful in reaching that goal. The first step is to set a goal with the client. The goal should be mutually agreed upon between both the client and the social worker. The first step is that it should be SMART. So a SMART goal is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. The goal should also be within your area of expertise and comfort level. You should not be working on a goal and associated tasks that you are not equipped to handle. For the purposes of this class, consider yourself a bachelor's level social worker. Bachelor's level social worker do not have the necessary expertise and experience to provide therapy or counseling. So this is one of your lecture quizzes for this week, lecture quiz questions. Which of the following tasks or goals would the social worker be able to work on if they're bachelor's level? Anything that has to do with therapy, in which you are providing therapy to a client, would not be within the competency of a bachelor's level social worker. What is within the competency of bachelor's level social worker would include referring the client to different resources. It might be working with clients on coping mechanisms. However, if a client is in need of therapy, you should be referring them to a counselor. You should not be the one actually providing the therapy. The other important thing to keep in mind for goal setting is that it ultimately needs to address the client's target concern and the reason that they're there. So those should be directly related. So you start with the target concern, then you identify the goal to address that target concern. It also needs to take into consideration the client resources and environment. That's part of what's realistic. If you are working with a client who wants to work on exercising or being more active, your goal needs and associated tasks needs to take into consideration whether the client is going to be able to run around their neighborhood. Is it safe enough to run around their neighborhood? Do they have access to a local gym that they're going to be able to utilize? You have to consider what they have access to because you need it to be realistic. So again, if we're going to explore SMART goals more thoroughly, this is the goal that it needs to specify what is to be accomplished. What is the outcome? It doesn't specify what they're going to achieve or what they're going to do. It specifies what they want to look like. So the first part is specific. So the S in SMART goal is specific. So it details what is to be accomplished. The second is measurable. So it needs to be able to be evaluated. You need to know and be able to observe the client's progress over time. So you need to develop a way to actually be able to measure and evaluate that. The next is that it needs to be achievable. So it needs to be realistically completed in the allocated time frame. So keep in mind that for this semester, the goal that you should be setting with your client needs to be something that they can achieve within the course of one semester. So for example, let's say your client wants to work on a goal of being healthier and specifically losing weight. Keep in mind that what's considered healthy weight loss is losing 1 to 2 pounds per week. Something more than that wouldn't be achievable, and it also wouldn't be healthy. So if you're working on a goal of losing weight with a client, and we're talking about over the course of one semester, semester's 15 weeks. So realistically, what would be achievable would be maybe 10 to 15 pounds over the semester. That would probably be achievable. What happens if you set an unachievable goal is that the client might have reduced confidence in their ability to achieve this goal in the future. They'll lose that confidence. They might still lose 10 to 15 pounds, which is awesome. But if you set a very unrealistic goal, such as losing 50 pounds in the course of the semester, that's when they're going to lose their confidence in their ability to be successful in the future. The next part of SMART goal is that it needs to be results oriented. So it's focused on results. So this is where you are defining the outcome, what their life is going to look like in the future, not the activity, not what they're working on. It also needs to be timely. So you need to specify the time frame for completion of the goal. So as our example, by the end of the semester, the client wants to reduce their depression symptoms by 1 point. So let's break that down. It's specific. We know that they want to reduce depression symptoms. So you know exactly what the goal is going to accomplish. It's measurable because you have a way to evaluate it. You are using a point-by-point system, and you are going to see if they're able to reduce it by 1 point. It's also achievable because 1 point, if we're thinking of on a self-anchored scale, which we'll talk about later, it's on a 1 through 5 point scale. So reducing it by 1 point is something that they could reasonably achieve. If you wanted to reduce their depression symptoms by 3 points, that might be a lot more difficult to do in the span of 4 months. It's also results oriented because you're focused on the outcomes, not the activities. So the outcome is to reduce their symptoms. The activities would be if you put in there that they want to engage in coping activities when they're feeling depressed. Engaging in coping activities is an activity. It's a task which you will be monitoring, but it should not be part of the goal statement. You are trying to define the outcome. It's also timely because it specifies by the end of the semester. Once you've defined the SMART goal, now you're going to identify the tasks or objectives to carry out that goal. What does the client need to do to be successful in reaching that goal? So these are action steps, essentially. Very specific actions that the client needs to take. And these are considered both general tasks and partialized tasks. So partialized tasks are the kind of the who, what, when, how. They break those tasks down even more so the client knows exactly what they're supposed to be working on, while the general tasks are a little broader. So let's say we have a goal of reducing anxiety. Your general task is to practice coping skills when you're feeling anxious. But if you just in general tell a client to practice coping skills, they might not know what that means. So the partialized task would be to download a meditation app and learn deep breathing techniques. So these are very specific actions that the client's going to take. So you can see that when we're looking at contracting, it's kind of like a funnel. We start from the top, our goal is at the top, then we have general tasks, and then we have partialized tasks at the bottom of that funnel. And that is what is going to direct the client ultimately to reaching their goal. If the client's goal is to increase physical activity, their general task might be to go to the gym 3 times a week. But let's be specific in what is the who, what, when, how of that general task. So the partialized tasks might be to select specific dates to go to the gym and write them down in your planner, to buy workout clothes, whatever the client specifically needs to do to be able to carry out that general task. If the client needs to improve time management skills and their general task is to review course due dates each week, then their partialized tasks might be to buy a planner and actually physically write down those due dates for the semester in the planner. So your second lecture quiz question for this week is to select a partialized task. So if someone wants to work on eating healthier, what would be an appropriate partialized task? So an appropriate partialized task, if they want to eat healthier on a budget, a partialized task might be to research nearby low-cost grocery stores. So that's very specific. They're going to pull up Google Maps and figure out where all of the closest low-cost grocery stores are. And that's something specifically that they can do to help them with the general task of healthy eating on a budget. The next thing you need to do once you understand your goals and your tasks is you have to find a way to evaluate the client's progress towards that goal. Ultimately, if the client isn't able to visualize if they've made progress, they might feel discouraged, they might lose confidence. They need to know whether or not they've actually made steps towards the goal. So when you're evaluating, it provides an indicator as to whether or not the goal has been achieved. So again, it evaluates the goal, not the task. So you need to find a way. If the client's goal is to reduce depression symptoms, you need to evaluate their depression symptoms, not the coping strategies that they've been engaging in. You will also be monitoring their engagement in the tasks, but ultimately the evaluation mechanism needs to be focused on the goal. One important thing to consider when you're thinking about an evaluation mechanism is you need to obtain a baseline of the target concern and the evaluation measure so that you can then assess that throughout the duration of your meetings. So if someone is working on reducing their depression symptoms, you need to know what their depression looked like at the beginning of the sessions. Another example is if you have a client who's working on weight loss. So weight loss is their goal. So maybe they want to lose 15 pounds by the end of the semester. You need a baseline. How much do they weigh at the beginning of the semester? So you can track that over time. If they are going to the gym to lose weight, that would be a task. So you would be monitoring how many times that they went to the gym and did they actually follow through on their tasks, but that would not be the key evaluation mechanism. The key evaluation mechanism would be what was their weight at the start, what's their weight at the end. There's 2 different ways to evaluate client progress. The first is quantitative evaluations. These are countable indicators of change. So these are things that you can measure. You can measure depression on a 1 to 5 scale. You can measure weight. Qualitative is information about the quality of the client's experience that might not be able to be measured. So we'll discuss some examples of different quantitative and qualitative evaluation measures. So the first, if we're looking at types of measures, the first is what's called a self-anchored scale. So we use self-anchored scale a lot when we're thinking about feelings. So when we're thinking about emotions such as depression and anxiety, it's called self-anchored because you have the client assess their own symptoms on a scale typically from 1 to 5. These are short, these are easy, and it's self-anchored because the client determines what's a 1 and what's a 5. Other measures, such as the ones that we completed in class, are not self-anchored because it had specific scales of how many times did this happen, how many days in the past week were you feeling depressed. On a self-anchored scale, you're simply going to ask the client, can you rate your depression symptoms on a scale of 1 to 5? And for each individual client, a 1 and a 5 is going to look differently. But you're able to easily evaluate the client's progress over time because they are going to tell you if they're a 1 or a 5 or somewhere in between. And it's something quick and easy that the client's going to be able to tell you. So this might be a scale that you have them complete every time they meet with you. Every time at the start of the meeting, you're going to ask them, what are you on a 1 to 5 today with regards to your depression or your anxiety or your stress level? It's also something that a client can track on their own on a weekly basis or daily basis between meetings. Because again, it's just a simple number that they would be able to give you, and you can very clearly see their progress over time. A self-anchored scale would be an example of a quantitative measure because it is something countable. It's something that you can really observe. A participant log is where they're going to log certain activities. So this might be that if a client has anxiety and panic attacks, maybe every time they have a panic attack, they're going to write down what happened before that panic attack. And this is going to provide you an indicator of their outcome in ways that you might be able to address it. So it's going to give you an idea of what are some of the triggers for those panic attacks and how can you address those. A participant log would be considered a qualitative indicator. Other participant logs might include if individuals are keeping like a food diary, so you can like visualize the different types of food that they've eaten that week, or if they're keeping a log of different social activities they engaged in or other coping activities. So it's just them writing things down, similar to journaling. A standardized scale is a measure. It's a lengthier measure, such as a standardized depression scale. These tend to take longer to complete. So one of the intake forms that you completed for class this semester is a standardized scale. So it takes a little longer and you kind of get a score at the end. And based on that score, you're able to compare yourself to other individuals. When it comes to depression, a key example is the Beck Depression Inventory. So this is something that you could look up. So it's Beck, B-E-C-K. And what it does is it asks a variety of questions. You answer those questions on a 1 to 3 scale, and then you get a score at the end. And that's based on that score, it's going to tell you whether you have mild depression, moderate depression, or severe depression. So you are comparing your depression to other individuals. This is also a quantitative measure, but it varies based on a self-anchored scale, because a self-anchored scale, you are comparing yourself across different points in time, versus a standardized scale is you are comparing yourself to someone else. Staff observations could also be a way to evaluate how clients are doing. So that's where social workers might write down their observations of a participant. This would be considered a qualitative scale, a qualitative measure. So this might consist of case notes, information that they provide in case notes would be considered a qualitative measure. And then finally, knowledgeable judges. So knowledgeable judges are individuals who know the participant well. So this might include friends, family, parent, siblings, significant other, teachers, individuals who are really able to provide information on their own observations of the participant and coping abilities and how they are doing. Another consideration is when you are working with people who are involuntary. So in a way, your client who you're working with this semester is involuntary because they have to participate in this program. They have to participate in this project because it's required for class. Other involuntary clients might include people who are mandated by law to be there. So working with parents in the child welfare system who maybe have had their kids taken away and might be in foster care. Sometimes people with disabilities are required to see social workers. People in the criminal justice system might be required to complete court mandated activities. So it really ranges from people who they don't want to be there, they're not going to engage in actions whatsoever, to people who are going to cooperate despite being required to be there. However, with that being said, a lot of times the goals, especially when we look at individuals who are mandated by law to be there, the goals are typically mandated by law. So along with them having to be there, there's certain goals that they are going to have to accomplish. So some strategies when we're working with involuntary clients, when we're working with people who don't really want to be there or people who are required to be there. The first is motivational congruence. So congruence is the same motivational motivation. So trying to find similar motivations. So if you're working with clients who might not be choosing to be there, can you find a way for them to work on the goals that is in line with, that's going to be motivated, that they're going to be motivated to do? So you have to find a way to make it meaningful to the client while also satisfying the goals that are mandated by law. So for example, think about a situation in which a mother has had her kids removed from custody because she left them unsupervised at home. Okay, so mom left her kids unsupervised at home. The mom is able to explain her circumstance, the situation. This is where you're really using some good social work and empathy skills. So at the end of the day, you can kind of work with the mom and talk with the mom to see that there's an overlap between the goals here. Is the mom does want to provide good supervision for her children. You know, she just wasn't able to provide supervision because she had to go to work. So you recognize that you are ultimately wanting the same goal. Both of you want proper supervision for the kids, and how can we work there? So part of it is to provide the mom with as many choices as possible, recognizing that clients who are involuntary don't have a lot of choice. They kind of have to go through certain steps just to kind of fulfill the requirement of law and have the mom get her kids back. But you're able to kind of listen to the mom, be empathetic, and help her realize that you have the same goal. You're both motivated to improve supervision for the kids. And maybe some tasks that you can work on is helping the mom get referred for a childcare subsidy, or having the mom identify resources, friends, family members she can call on if childcare falls through and she still needs to go to work. So you're able to find that common motivation to reach the same goal. An agreeable mandate is where you might not be able to find the same goal, but you're going to find some sort of common ground. There's going to be some differing views between the individual and the court, but you're able to find some common ground. So for example, let's say that you are working with a spouse who was convicted of intimate partner violence and required by law to meet with a social worker to work on anger management and communication. So the spouse might walk in and say, I don't have any problems. I don't have any anger management problems. So you're not going to be able to convince that person that anger management is something you really need to be working on, but maybe you're able to find something that they're able to agree to. They're able to agree that although they don't agree that anger management is a problem, if they work on communication skills, that can ultimately improve their relationship with their significant other. So maybe instead of calling it anger management, you're able to call it, let's work on communication and communication skills. So they're still kind of working towards the same goals, just in a way that they are going to be more comfortable, in a way that they agree to it. The final, these are again, these strategies are working from top to bottom. If you're not able to kind of really appeal to someone's motivation, you're not able to agree upon something, the final strategy is simply getting rid of the mandate, is just appealing to their need, their want to not have to go to court, to jail anymore. That maybe if they don't complete this, if they don't complete these sessions with you, they're going to get sent back to prison, or they're not going to get their kids back. They might not agree with the goal, but ultimately you have to just appeal to their desire to be free of the restraints, to not have to have the court watching them anymore. And sometimes that's what you're just going to have to tell them, that, hey, I know you don't want to be here. I know you don't agree with this, but if you want to get your kids back, you're going to have to do this. So you're going to have to use a lot of empathy, listening, active listening. Tell me about the situation. Why are you frustrated? Recognizing that they probably haven't had some great experiences with the court system, social workers in the past. You have to really build rapport and build their trust and make them realize that you're on their team. You want a positive outcome for them. They're going to have to work with you. Again, part of this, if they're not going to be motivated to do anything else, it's how can you build in as much choice as possible throughout every single step. If the client doesn't get to choose what goals they're working on, what can you let them choose instead? There might be tasks that they can work on, that they get control over, ways of doing things, because ultimately they don't have a lot of control. Their control has been taken away from them. And by giving them that control, they will be empowered. They'll feel more connected to you. They'll have more trust in you. And they'll be more motivated to actually work through these tasks. So here is a sample client contract. This contract is also posted on Canvas, so I would recommend reading through it. So if a target concern is that, this is a pretty basic contract. So if you have a target concern that your client hasn't been getting enough sleep at night, you have a SMART goal that by a certain date, the client will improve her sleep quality as measured by a score on a very specific assessment measure. Okay, so that's your SMART goal. The tasks, she'll practice positive sleep hygiene, such as not drinking caffeine after 4 p.m., setting an alarm for 10 p.m. to turn her TV off. She'll also work on stress reduction techniques by scheduling an appointment with K-State Counseling and listening to one meditation podcast. You're going to monitor her progress. You're going to monitor her progress by having her complete the sleep quality assessment, which is a standardized tool that is available online at the start of every meeting. You'll track her score on a chart so she can visualize her chart over time. Some of the client's strengths and resources is that she lives in a quiet building. Her roommate goes to sleep early. She's optimistic about change. She's flexible. However, she does have some barriers, such as anxiety over classes is giving her trouble at sleeping at night. She's dependent upon caffeine to stay awake because she's not sleeping enough. And sometimes that caffeine can be the cause for her staying awake. So this is one example of a sample contract. This would likely be with a voluntary client, but this could be easily adapted with an involuntary client.